Okay. Well, while others are joining, we will get started. We are so lucky to have Catherine Van Tassel back again for our Mental Health Month to talk about leadership compassion and how you can nurture mental health awareness in your workplace. Catherine has a huge and wonderful resume and background that I want to just share a little bit about. She has a dual master's in both social work and physician assistant studies from the University of Utah. And she is a licensed clinical social worker and a board certified physician assistant who specializes in mental health and lifestyle medicine. So she has a large background in diverse clinical environments, including both inpatient and outpatient settings that helps develop well-rounded clinical expertise. All right, I'll turn the time over to you, Catherine, to introduce the topic today and to get us started.
Thank you so much. Well, first, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has come today because the landscape of mental health in the workplace has, I think, changed in the workplace and nationwide. And so it's Mental Health Awareness Month. So this is especially of interest, but I think just in general, um, the need, the interest, has grown. So thank you for taking time to come here and thank you for what you're doing. It is really, really going to make a change. So we'll get started because we have lots of information to cover. And what that looks like today is just, okay, what does mental health look like today and how should we be thinking about it? What is the impact of stress and mental health on our really be highlighting today is that absolutely, there are people with diagnosed mental health conditions like major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, substance use disorder, bipolar. However, every single one of us has a brain, and it is an organ just like our heart and just like our lungs. And when we don't prioritize brain health, then it impacts us physically and mentally. So my invitation for this is that this isn't just for somebody that has a mental health diagnosed condition, that this is for all of us. Just like if we don't prioritize our heart health, that's going to have significant consequences. So today I want you to be able to recognize signs and symptoms of mental health and mental health challenges, develop effective communication strategies for worsening concerns related, provide appropriate resources. In no means is this a training for you to be a clinician, for you to diagnose, for you to treat. This is a very brief overview to give you some tools and to start the conversation. I do a full day training to certify people in mental health first aid, and that's 8 hours. We have 1 hour together. So really this is, okay, let's just look at the landscape. Let's recognize, let's have some tools, feel comfortable talking about it, and just get started. So what is mental health? Well, I like the World Health Organization's definition of this because, again, with the theme of this applies to everybody, this description, I think, meets that need. So mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. So again, this idea that this mental health applies to everybody. So mental health today, what does this look like? First, I just want to start that these numbers are likely much less than what they really are, even though they're still very significant, because we know that a lot of people either don't come forward to get help for their mental health conditions, or they aren't addressed, so they're not captured in our statistics. But what we have from our best statistics is that 1 in 6 youth and 1 in 5 US adults experience a mental health illness every year. And I mean, most of us, if not all of us, have seen the crisis in terms of mental health in our youth today. And when children are struggling at home, that's going to impact a parent who's at work. Also, if a parent is struggling, that's going to impact children in the home. So just this idea of being aware of that. And then, unfortunately, we see people with mental health illness. 33.4% of them experience a substance use disorder as well. So we get these co-occurring conditions, and we know that sometimes one will use substances to medicate symptoms of mental health. So just something to be aware of. And when we're thinking about balancing our life and our mental health, I mean, if I were to ask each and every one of you here today, what is stressing you out? Likely to be a lot of common concerns, maybe some from this list here. And then, of course, we would each have our own individual concerns as well, specific to our life. This life is not without stress, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, stress is good for us. However, it's not the stress that is necessarily bad. It's that when somebody doesn't have or utilize tools to have emotional resilience and combat that stress is when we see the mental and physical effects. So what are those? Well, it is basically from your head to toe when we don't balance our life and our mental health. So our brain, we get worsening depression or become depressed, anxiety, have difficulty concentrating, have headaches, dizziness, panic, can be very irritable, agitated, things that normally wouldn't cause us to overly react. Maybe it's like a stage 10 meltdown when that thing would have just rolled off our back. Distress, so stomach upset, acid reflux, changes in appetite. 80% of people will overeat under times of stress. So we can get weight gain. Immune system becomes weakened. We get high levels of inflammation. Our heart, the pressure on our heart literally gets harder as our blood pressure increases, our heart rate increases, and this can even impact our reproductive system as well. And so people will ask me, how in the world is stress impacting my reproductive system or my heart or, you know, from top to bottom? And essentially what happens... Oh, sorry, I thought I could hear somebody talking back.
I will mute everybody. Sorry about that.
Thanks. Essentially what happens is that when we're under times of stress, again, some stress is good for us, but when we don't have the tools to mediate it, we're not eating well, we're not sleeping well, we don't have mindfulness, breath work, all those kinds of things, it remains elevated. And when it remains elevated, that means our cortisol remains elevated because this is our stress response. And when our body goes into a stress response, it thinks that it's fighting for its life. This is this fight or flight. So as opposed to rest and digest, we go into our fight or flight system. So basically, our saliva decreases because our digestive system turns off. Digesting your food is not something that's going to help when you're in an emergency state. That's why you get the GI symptoms. Blood vessels constrict. Your heart starts beating faster, basically to get your body ready to run from whatever this source of danger is. That's where we see pressure on our heart, increased blood pressure. Since our stomach's turned off, we're not getting the digestive enzyme. Hence getting back, neck pain, which can lead to tension headaches. Our eyes dilate so we can see really far. We will start breathing faster. So where you might start breathing shallow. I don't know if you've ever noticed like a time where you were tense and you like maybe finally took a deep breath and felt like, geez, I haven't taken a deep breath for a minute. We get changes in our bowel, and then our blood pressure increases as major blood vessels dilate. And then our brain. What happens to our brain? And this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I just want to introduce you to your literally amazing brain, because this will help the rest of this webinar. So much will make sense, but also so much will make sense for yourself and then anybody that you're in a leadership position for. So there are just three structures in your brain that I want you to become familiar with. So most of us know about our frontal lobe. That's like the executive. Think about the CEO of your body. And this is a company that's being well run when your frontal lobe is working well. In the middle of your brain, you have the amygdala. So the amygdala, think about the guard sitting outside of a gated community, or a security guard at the front office of a building. The amygdala is essentially your security guard. And I call her Amy. So Amy's sitting up there, just always watching, on high alert, to see if there's anything that she should turn on the emergency system for. Is there anything that is going to hurt us? So if we're in a crowded room and somebody were to scream fire, Amy would shut off your frontal lobe, also your hippocampus, would dilate your eyes so you can see far to get running to get out of there. Your saliva would decrease, because remember, if you're going to burn up in a fire, you don't need to be digesting the lunch you just had. Your heart would start beating faster. You would drop a whole bunch of glucose from your liver to give you energy to run. This is Amy's major job. Watch for threats and then turn on the system. Now, here's the thing. If somebody was raised in a traumatic environment, their amygdala can grow larger, meaning that they then go into this life with this brain that's a little bit more hyper aware, hyper alert, maybe more anxious, always waiting for the next bad thing to happen, being very anxious all the time. And this real or perceived danger can feel like it's around every corner, or with smaller things that really wouldn't feel that way raised in a traumatic house. The last place is your hippocampus. So I like to think of this as like a little hippo with some little round librarian glasses on. And that's because our hippocampus helps us store important information. Now, something to know, if somebody is not sleeping well consistently or having a good night's sleep, the memories or things that they learned that day, they don't get stored. So there's something called sleep spindles that help us store our memories, things that we learn during the day when we sleep. But if we are not sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, that sleep's really interrupted. We can have difficulty learning a new task and then remembering that the next day, or doing our everyday work in our offices. So when we're under times of unmediated stress, remember, it's okay to have this prolonged elevated level of cortisol, fight or flight. Our amygdala is on high alert, and our frontal lobe, where we make good decisions, creativity, and logic, that's offline, and so is our hippocampus, where we have memories and information. So we've heard the term burnout. This now is going to make so much more sense now that you understand your brain, as you understand what we are talking about as we go on, and where we can become burned out or become very anxious, very depressed. And essentially, results of stress that aren't managed, everything becomes intolerable. And then instead of being preventive, we are now trying to back it up, and that can take more time, or even months, to repair. So the idea, if we can catch it early or be preventative, that's always best, like with any other organ. Look at our mental health in the workplace. What does this look like? And why should we care? Why should we put effort and time into this? Well, we know that 1 in 3 American workers suffer from chronic work stress. This is costing us a lot of money, upwards to $27 billion of lost worth of workdays are lost to mental health absences. and we see decrease in job performance, productivity, engagement, communication with coworkers, physical capability, and daily functioning. And again, this idea of learning how our brain works, now you understand why it's harder to concentrate, why it's harder to be productive, communicate well with others, if everything just feels on high alert. So I want you just to think about some questions. So this is a leadership training, and we're working with people and wanting to be inspiring and productive, and personal goals and being a leader that's different to everybody, and some are the same. But thinking about, okay, what is it like to work in your work environment? The fact that you're having this training means that leadership thinks that mental health is important, and that is fantastic. And we'll talk about even more what that looks like in terms of increased morale. And then just like a little snapshot about how work can impact things that we do to care for ourselves. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily happening at your workplace, but just this idea of how it's always good to be aware of our work-life balance and how we may manage people and what expectations are can impact the way that they have tools to deal with stress. And one example is like emailing. So we'll see some companies no emails after a certain time or before a certain time. And, you know, we all have these little supercomputer phones in our pockets, and most of us sleep with them next to our bed. It's the last thing we look at before we go to bed, and the first thing we look at when we wake up. You know, I have a whole presentation on disconnecting and how it's important that your cell phone gets its own bedroom, but that's a different conversation. But just essentially being aware of how people, like if you are getting all these emails before you go to bed, how well is your sleep going to be if you're worried, anxious that maybe you're going to miss something? So again, I'm not saying that this is necessarily happening at your workplace, but that's an example of how this could impact somebody. And just thinking, okay, what is it like to work in my work? And having a conversation with others to say, oh, you know, this is one thing that I think we could potentially work on. And why? Why again? So we know that if leadership has an open dialogue regarding the importance of mental health, people are more willing to get help, ask for help. There's higher productivity, higher retention, less turnover. People are more engaged. Companies save money because you have less absenteeism, presenteeism, all of the things that I was talking about. And one of the best things to do is lead by an example and empower employees. So the fact that leadership's having this training, that's a great step saying, hey, we care about this, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to give you skills and tools and support. And then that trickles down to you, and then that trickles down to a coworker who may help another coworker. So this idea of destigmatizing mental health in our workplace. And having ongoing education and resources, which we're going to talk about resources. We're creating this safe environment. For some leadership in their like team meetings, I have seen they start each down. So everybody says, you know, here's one good thing that's working for me, and here's one bad thing. And this can be personal or this can be in the workplace, but this idea of, we're not saying, oh, open up and we're going to do group therapy here, but just this idea that we're just going to share, hey, everybody's having things that are going good and bad, and we're going to start the meeting by providing some support. I actually have a leader that does this, and we do this at the beginning of our meetings. It's very humanizing too for the people that are on my team, because you know, we're not just robots. We have things going on in our lives. And so there's a good connection and empathy there. And then always having clear expectations and realistic, setting clear and realistic expectations for those in leadership is very helpful in terms of brain health. And I like this. Helen, you're the team leader. Okay. But how are we doing as a nation, and why just having this webinar showing the commitment at your workplace to not being part of these numbers. Because right now, if you ask employees, 40% of employees agree that their company invests in developing supportive managers, less than half. And 30% of employees state that their company's leadership speaks openly about mental health. So we know that this is important. Also, we know that if a manager is doing some of the things that we talked about, like I said, people are more likely to ask and get help, which again, this idea of prevention is always best scenario, but at least getting some treatment, as opposed to so many people that are not getting good care. So we see through that their manager cares about their well-being, and 2 in 5 employees report that their manager encourages them to take time off when needed. So just time to consider what this looks like. And most employees feel like they're not very comfortable in providing feedback to their manager. So what does that look like in your workplace to make it a more safe and comfortable environment? And then less than half of employees know about their company's mental health services, and 38% would feel comfortable using their company's services. So when we get to some of the resources, we'll talk about tools to educate why some people may not know or remember mental health services and how they could become more comfortable doing that. So this is the whole point, to strengthen workplace mental health. And as a side note, if this is interesting to any of you, the Bell Mental Health America to organizations that meet a criteria for, there's, all sorts of different categories of initiatives that workplaces are doing. And so if you guys are interested in looking at this, that would just be something to do, like, hey, either where are we stacking up, or do we want to apply for the Bell still? And because, we're doing all of these things. Okay, so let's just look at some common mental health conditions so that we can start to recognize what this would look like in an individual. So major depressive disorder, we see sad and irritable mood, which results in changes in how we eat, how we sleep, and our energy just slows down. And then now you understand your brain and why this is happening. Difficulty thinking, CEOs out on vacation, concentration, librarian closed down for service. Remember, difficulty concentrating and remembering. And then this can get so bad for some people that they may think, gosh, you know what? Oh, it would be better if I wasn't here. Or maybe I'm a burden to my family members, to my friends, and they may have thoughts or a plan to harm themselves, or even thoughts of suicide. We lose lack of interest in things that we used to do that we love. So Joey used to go hiking every single weekend and now hasn't been hiking for months. Overwhelming feelings of guilt and worthlessness and hopelessness and emptiness. We can all feel guilt and worthlessness at times, but this is out of proportion or ongoing or uncontrollable. And then now you understand why we get headaches, digestive disorders, and pain. Generalized anxiety to be similar things, like being easily fatigued, muscle tension, sleep disturbance. We can also get changes in our appetite, difficulty concentrating or our mind going blank. But then we see a lot of slowing down with generalized anxiety disorder, with major depressive disorder. But with generalized anxiety disorder, it could be this just feeling very restless and keyed up and on edge. And this comment is just, I cannot control the rumination, the worry of these thoughts that are nonstop in my head, and it is making it difficult or impacting my life. And then, sadly, we can again see things get so difficult for somebody that they feel like suicide is their only way out. If you talk to survivors of suicide attempt, the majority of them will say, I didn't want to die. That wasn't what I wanted. I just didn't feel like I had any other way out of this situation, or I had no reason or purpose for living, feeling trapped. This is a common theme you'll hear. And then what happens is that somebody might talk about it, they might write about it, they might even, verbalize or threaten it. Likely these are signs of somebody asking for help and not having the tools to be able to do it. Looking for a way to harm themselves. We can see people Googling it on the internet, showing changes in mood. So think changes in mood, appetite, sleep, irritation, agitation, all of those things. And then substance use disorder. So in the pandemic and post-pandemic, well, in the in substance use, it's interesting because when you look at population data, sadly, we have seen women's overall mortality increase secondary to substance use disorder. And we've never seen that happen before, this sharp raise in women with substance use disorder. Also, there's somewhat in the good news is that there's somewhat of a little bit of a cultural shift when we're looking at younger generations. It's not using non-alcoholic beers. That's become more popular, non-alcoholic drinks. However, we're seeing more of an increase in substances like marijuana. So there's just some change. But what are we looking for overall as warning signs? So when we're using larger amounts for longer times, wanting to cut down or stop, but unable to do so, spending a lot of time trying to get the substance, use the substance, managing use with substance, and then having cravings and not being able to manage our work obligations, our personal obligations because of the substance, continuing to use despite negative outcomes and potentially even despite using when we put ourselves in places of danger. And then social isolation, withdrawing from our family, from our friends, from recreational activities. And then developing a tolerance and having to use more, or withdrawal symptoms when we're not using. So I love this infographic because it shows all of the tools when we think, again, this whole idea about brain health. We all have a brain, just like our heart, and we all need to be caring for it. When I was working inpatient for the University's Neuropsychiatric Institute, when people came to see me, they had been admitted for an inpatient stay in a hospital, typically secondary to a failed suicide attempt, or they were they were in such a bad state that they were not safe to be home, or they were maybe were having a psychotic disorder. Essentially, this was somebody's worst day, and people can feel very hopeless and overwhelmed and like nothing is going to help them. And even if you're not admitted to a hospital, we can feel hopeless and overwhelmed. And my idea as a practitioner is always being able to show people there is a tool, there is something we can do. If that doesn't work, there's something else. Or when we use things together, like you see in this infographic, really that's where we see the best outcomes for our mind. Also, the side effect is for our body as well. And so this is looking at our community and our environment, how we are preventing disease and treating it, and using conventional and complementary approaches together. I prescribe medication all the time, and medication saves lives. But what we do know too is for some people, medication might not work or have lots of side effects, or only bring us to maybe 50%, but we need some more help. And we have evidence-based tools in terms of self-help, lifestyle medicine approaches that we know help in terms of improving clinical validated scores on a Hamilton D test or a PHQ-9. And this includes how we move our body, our personal development, how we're eating, bringing down inflammation in our brain and our body, how we're interacting in our community, what kind of mindfulness, meditation do we have? And our former Surgeon General said, there is no health without mental health. And that is so true. I mean, just like we were talking about a leadership approach in terms of being top down, our body is like that too. And so we're going to visit some of these. I have an hour presentation on each of these alone, so we could go through all the data there, but we don't have time. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of when we look at lifestyle medicine, self-help, and coping strategies. So not only providing those as opportunities in our workplace and suggesting them, that they can make, well, we know they make a difference. And there's so many ways to do that. And that's how we move our bodies. That's what we read, who's in our social network. Again, meditation, mindfulness, peer support groups, and hobbies. And so, again, this is not an exhaustive list. I just wanted to give a couple examples and then maybe some ideas of what you can incorporate in your workplace. Every workplace is different, but just to get the ball rolling here and some ideas. And I mean, really, I would love for you guys to talk about this after and what you can be doing in your space. So there was a study published in Molecular Psychiatry, and it was a study to understand the exposure to urban and natural environments and how it affects our mental health and our brain. So what we know, and again, you now know, Amy, our amygdala is more activated during stress. We know that now. And we can see people in like rural environments actually having more of an activated amygdala, which is interesting. However, what we also know is that we can use green spaces around us. So this doesn't mean you have to go into the mountains or go to an ocean, which would be a blue space, to get the benefits of this. Because in this study, they just took people on a walk on a busy street versus a walk on like a tree-lined, more grassy street. This was both done in a busy city. And what they saw is that when people were stressed out and anxious, that when they went on that walk with a tree-lined street with grass, maybe think in a park, that their cortisol levels, that whole fight or flight, their emergency system, it slowed down, it calmed down. And so we know that this can, one, be a preventable tool, a preventative tool, or a useful tool. And one of the recommendations I make is, can you do, well, first of all, we have people who work at home, we have people who work in an office. What opportunities can we give to somebody that may have a green space for them to go on a walk during the day? So would that be, you know, after a stressful meeting or after a stressful event at work, or, you know, I've worked for places 15-minute break twice a day to do some sort of self-care. Again, this idea to brainstorm, but knowing we have this tool, if we can get people out of artificial environments into some sort of tree green space, that we can calm down our brain and have better concentration, store memories, learn better, be more productive. And then what about using breaks to do some sort of meditation or mindfulness practice? So Harvard University took participants who never meditated before. And I think that this is a good example for somebody that you may be trying to encourage to start meditation. I mean, that may just seem like, well, I might as well just like, I mean, well, you could be an alien talking to me right now. I've never meditated in my life. I don't know how to do it. That seems really hard. I mean, who knows what that may be, the entry level to. So these people never meditated, and this is the difference we saw in their brains, is that in 8 weeks, just 2 short months, those that meditated 27 minutes a day, and you don't have to do this in one like setting. You could do 10 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at lunch, and then, you know, 12 minutes at night before you go to bed. And which may even be better to break it up like that. But what they saw is that their brains changed in 2 months. And so what changed in their brain? Well, remember our hippocampus, our hippo, that actually increased in gray matter. And that's associated with self-awareness, compassion, introspection. And we also know storing memories, concentration. Um, and then our amygdala, which I was talking about, can grow larger in some people that have been in stressful environments. This is where we get stress and anxiety, actually decreased. That is just in 2 months. Basically being more emotionally resilient, being a better coworker because you would have more compassion, be able to work better with others, you're less stressed and anxious. That's a pretty significant change from just taking some time to breathe. Because essentially, mindfulness is this idea of connecting to your breath, not having judgments on your thoughts. And we know that this physiologically changes our body when we just practice breath work for 2 to 5 minutes. You can see it if you're wearing a smartwatch that takes your heart rate. You can see your heart rate come down. But the fight or flight that I was telling you about in your body, you leave that fight or flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system, where your heart's pumping, your eyes are dilated, where your digestion's turned off, where your liver's dropping glucose into your body, and you go into a parasympathetic state. Everything slows down, calms down, is moving, digestion's. And again, we just do this, we can do this in 2 to 5 minutes. So if you are recommending this to somebody who's never done it, I mean, you can do YouTube videos, you can do this without anything, literally just taking time to breathe. One of the things that I recommend is square breathing. So Navy SEALs do square breathing where they breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold for 4. Or there are apps. So you could share one of these apps to start a mindfulness practice. And then we want to think about professionals that can help. So we have medical doctors, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, psychologists, social workers, counselors, therapists, substance use professionals. There's a whole plethora of professionals that can help. The one call out I would make is a little tool is if somebody feels very hesitant to going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or therapist, maybe inviting them to go see their doctor. When you go into a doctor's office, there's a PHQ-2, which is the screening tool for somebody that may have major depressive disorder or self-harm thoughts. This will provide an opportunity if they were to screen positive for that doctor to approach that. Also, people are more likely to go into a doctor. You may say, hey, maybe you should get your labs checked because we know that we can become anxious or depressed when our thyroid's off, or our vitamin D is low, or B12. So again, this is some way to get somebody into professional care if they're resistant towards others, and then potentially opening up the door for other opportunities. So here's a way to remember stepwise when you're residents of major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, or something else, and how you could walk through this in helping an individual. The one thing that I want to say is some situations, maybe suicidal ideation if you have a concern with that, or getting somebody therapeutic help with a therapist, just checking with HR to see what their policies and procedures are, because sometimes each company handles that a little bit differently. But in general, what we're looking at is we want to be compassionate and listen without judgment. We're always assessing for risk, evaluating for harm to self or others, reassuring and connecting them to resources. And this could be self-help or professional resources. So if needed, empowering self-care with professional self-help. And then who's in their support? Family, is that friends? It may only be their coworkers. So just being kind of cognizant of that. When we're looking at early signs and symptoms, it can vary. Whoops, one too many. But essentially, this is a new pattern, and it's new and it's a pattern because all of us can have a bad day. All of us can be grumpy one day, of course. or come to work maybe looking a little bit more disheveled. But we're seeing this constant change of being more fatigued. Maybe our clothes are changing than our typical appearance. Our personal hygiene's decreased. You just see this overall loss of interest and feeling more sad or maybe irritable, anxious, agitated. Most certainly difficult concentrating. Just our mentation is really impacted, which is also making it difficult to make decisions. And as to get treated, everything just takes one more step and everything increases. So maybe we were late for work and now we're just not showing up. Maybe we were a little irritable, but now we're just really agitated all the time. Maybe we missed like 1 or 2 assignments, but basically we've just become non-productive at all. And then sometimes people can become so distressed that an individual may harm themselves. And it's a non-suicidal harm. They're not meaning, there's no intention to take their life, but essentially things have just gotten so loud, heavy, hard, whatever that sensation is for them emotionally, that if they cause a physical sensation, it can remove them from that, and there's something else to focus on. And then again, this idea that this is just too hard, it would be better if I wasn't here. So how do you start a conversation? And, again, this is just an overview class. I would love to us to get together and do some role playing to kind of go through this. And there's a step-by-step guide. I will send this PowerPoint to Sadie and she can send it to everyone. But I just want you to think of 3 things. 1, talking to somebody in a place that's safe and comfortable. If you have a computer out, closing the computer. If you have a phone out, putting it in your pocket, just so there's not lights or screens or notifications that could be distracting. And I want you to not feel like you have to solve the problem, because you don't. Remember, you're not becoming a clinician. You're not going to give advice. Nobody needs to be Oprah here. We're just going to listen. So you're just going to ask somebody in a compassionate, non-judgmental way, hey, are you okay? I've noticed this is going on. You want to talk about it, or should maybe you want to go for a walk if they feel comfortable? And then you just need to repeat what you hear and provide some feedback like, I'm sorry, things are difficult for you right now. That sounds hard to manage. Again, you're not treating it, this empathetic, and then providing compassion. And then you can provide some resources. And we're going to talk about those. But, oh, hey, have you thought about maybe doing this? Or I've heard this can be really helpful. And again, I really encourage you guys to maybe have some internal conversations about this, maybe do some role playing, look over this step-by-step guide to start that conversation. And this idea that we have this whole continuum of mental health services for somebody. And what does that look like? Well, let's first look at when we're wanting to make sure that somebody is safe. So this is a step. And any of you who've gone through QPR, mental health first aid, will be familiar with this. But you want to ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself, or are you thinking about suicide? If they say yes, do you have a plan? Have you decided when or how you would do it? And have you done anything to secure means? Do they have a gun? Did they get a plan on the internet? Have they been stockpiling medications? If they have answered yes to those questions, to any of those questions, then this is an emergent situation and we need to call 911. We don't want to leave that person until they get connected and they're safe, because we know that this person is in crisis and they're really high risk. Also, we have 988, which is our suicide and crisis lifeline. Confidential, and this will go to your local resource. And so here it goes up to the University of Utah if you were to call that number. There's also a Spanish option, And there's also a veteran option. So good to know that there's specialized resources for those that need it. And then we have Live On Utah. I really like this organization, what they're doing, and some of you may be familiar with it. Just a couple of things aside from going to their website and looking at their resources. They have the Live On playbook on Instagram. And if you want to become a Live On ambassador, you can go through and take the 10 modules. It takes about an hour from what I understand to go through each module, to go through each of the 10 modules, not each one, 1 hour. And then when you are done, you can send them a message and say you went through it and you become a Live On ambassador. Also, if 80% of your organization does this, then your organization becomes a Live On Utah ambassador, which I think is pretty cool. So another thing to consider doing. And then livethroughthis.org is a beautiful, very humanizing. It's a website. It was created by Miss Stage, and she has taken pictures. And each of these pictures, these people have written stories about their experience with mental health, suicidal ideation. Maybe they are survivors of suicide. And as you can see, this hits all of us, men, women, no matter our age, our race, our backgrounds, our socioeconomic status. All of us are impacted by this. And so this is just a great resource to share or to look at to provide yourself some more education in this area. Let's look at a little example. Sarah, a close colleague of Mark, notices a change in his demeanor and personal hygiene. Mark used to be cheerful and engaged, but now withdraws during lunch breaks and avoids social interactions. Mark mentions in passing that he has not been sleeping well and appears fatigued. Sarah approaches Mark, gently expresses concern, and Mark confides that he's been battling with depression due to personal issues. So we are seeing several warning signs here. Despite Sarah's support, Mark's depression worsens. He calls in sick frequently and struggles to concentrate at work. Sarah suggests he speaks to their company's EAP. Mark appreciates her concern but feels just too overwhelmed. One day, Sarah finds Mark crying in the big break room. She sits with him, reassuring him that seeking help is a sign of strength. Together, they reach out to the EAP counselor and explore coping strategies. Okay, so a few things here when we're talking about getting resources. So one is that somebody may be so overwhelmed that, remember, their frontal lobe has turned off, or you may have told them about, in this example, we're talking about an EAP, you may have told them about that resource and then they didn't utilize it. And you're thinking, I've told you about this. Why haven't you utilized this? Well, remember, those things go on vacation, they go offline, or we're already overwhelmed. So doing one more thing, even though that likely is going to help us, may be just too difficult. So taking a few minutes to going into another room and calling together can really help that individual get that appointment set, and then they just have to show up for the appointment. We're just, again, helping this brain that's offline. And there are so many reasons when you're starting a conversation with somebody saying, hey, I'm more, and how, have you thought about calling our EAP? And here are one of the many reasons why you could call an EAP. I mean, this isn't just, I think we have to be in this maybe emergency situation, or it's X, whatever X is in our brain. But I mean, this could be just changing life events like moving, loss of a relationship, of course, mental health conditions. Maybe somebody has trauma in their in their history that they haven't addressed, or they're in a season of more stress. Mental Health Awareness Month, I said, is like my Christmas. I love this time of year, but I'm also very busy. So I have to double down in my sleep and my exercise. I need to make sure that I'm doing all of those tools, and maybe somebody would need to talk to somebody to start managing stress. Personal issues they don't feel comfortable sharing with their family or friends, or just feeling Also, you can go to Mental Health America, and they have this mental health test. So, am I suffering from depression or anxiety or PTSD? And find out. And then, wrapping it up when talking about EAPs, reminding the individual it's free, it's confidential. Nobody is going to even know that you called from the workplace. This is no cost to you. And also, the way that EAPs work is that you might have 3, 5, 6 sessions. It's not that that is for the whole year, it's per event. So let's say somebody moved and they just kind of need to have some support with that life change. So they see somebody for 3 times. And then in 3 months, one of their children are struggling and they need some support there. So maybe they just have 2 sessions. And their marriage is difficult. You see what I'm saying? Like there's more sessions there. And then if somebody does need ongoing therapy that the EAP cannot provide coverage for, okay, well, let's look into using insurance if that's applicable. And psychologytoday.com is a great resource that you can go in and you can filter for male, female, type of therapy, insurance, telehealth, in person. And it's this way to be able to, you can see their pictures, a little bit of a bio that they wrote. I think it's a good idea or a good thing to see, will I connect with this person? Do they take my insurance? Are they, all of these things to make it what can be very overwhelming, an easier way to get into treatment. And then also, always like to have all of resources. There is a resource just for man therapy called Man Therapy. And I love their slogan. It's okay to cry, even when it's not about sports. So essentially just taking care of our mental health, what is going to speak to somebody, what will feel comfortable. And there are, so many individualized resources. And you can even come into this website and take the head inspection. And explore topics. So even if you don't want to get therapy, there may be something in there that's insightful for an individual. And then in Salt Lake, we have the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team through the University of Utah. So if you have a team member or a family member or a loved one who may be struggling and they're having a mental health crisis, Mobile Crisis Outreach Team will come to you with social workers. They'll come in an unmarked vehicle. It's private. I actually just used this a couple of weeks ago, and it was incredibly helpful. And then Utah also has the warm line. So we talked about 988 being the crisis emergency line. But the warm line, it's not 24 hours a day, but it is confidential. And 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. So good coverage there. It's just this idea, we're not in crisis, but gosh, I just could use some support and need to talk to somebody. Use the warm line. You can use it as much as you need. And then, of course, there are other mental health resources like the National Alliance on Mental Health, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, 211. 211 is a great resource when you're looking for, it has everything. I mean, everything from financial resources, attorneys, food banks, financial assistance with like utilities. So just really a resource for all the like community. And then of course, utah.gov, our local mental health authority. Okay. I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because we're running out of time. But this example is with somebody at work who they're noticing signs and symptoms of substance use, arriving late, physical changes. And what are some resources that we could give, and how is substance use impacting the workplace? So we know that about 10% of our group will struggle with the substance use disorder, and sadly, only about 1 in 11 people will get access that has a substance use treatment disorder. And 70% of individuals with substance use continue to maintain employment. So it's happening in our workspaces, but people aren't getting help. How do we help somebody? So again, checking in with HR to see what policies and procedures are in terms of helping people access mental health. We have SAMHSA, so Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. And just like psychologytoday.com, they have a find treatment.gov, and you can go inside, you can go on the website and find inpatient, outpatient treatment, residential treatment, and look for resources, get some help that way. And then there are lots of apps, which I think are so incredibly helpful because we know in terms of substance use, community is the like cornerstone of treatment. And so if somebody's working and they can't get to a meeting, you could get to a meeting through one of these apps, like In the Rooms or Faces of Recovery. USARA, I mean, community for everybody, and especially in the recovery community. They have sober softball and just like wraparound services, peer recovery coaching, family support. This is a fantastic resource. And then I just want to say for anybody that may have a family member or a loved one that may be struggling with alcohol use, this impacts more than just that person, and they need support too. So there is Al-Anon for family members, and they have support groups, resources. It's good to get involved in Al-Anon if you have a family member who is struggling with a substance use disorder, specifically Al-Anon's for alcohol use disorder. Okay, oh, I'm so glad I finished a few minutes before the top of the hour, so if there were any questions. It's a lot of information to cover, but hopefully this will be really helpful. I will send this out to you. I also have a resource specifically for substance use to help in terms of resources.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was wonderful. I do have some follow-up questions for you. You mentioned that only 2 out of 5 employees feel comfortable providing their manager with feedback. Where would you start in a workplace that maybe it's not the norm to provide feedback to managers or supervisors? What kind of tools or resources could we give to teams to start that dialogue?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So a lot of things. Again, this is not one size fit all, so I'll just give a few ideas and you guys can have an internal conversation about this. I always think it's good for leadership. So Sadie, I don't know if this would come for you or from somebody else, to say, to put out a little statement. You know, and Mental Health Awareness Month is a great time to do it, but anytime. You know, we are dedicated to, and mental health is important to us, and you know, of course, in your words, and in an effort to do that, we're providing leadership training. You did the employee training, so listing some of the initiatives that you're doing, list your mental health resources, so like EAP, anything else, and then Sadie, like if we do any more like webinars or things like that, we're going to do these on this date. We were talking about taking walking breaks, meditation, access to apps. Some of them are free, and saying, hey, here are some things that you can use. And then, you know, leadership has gone through this training, so advertising that. We want you to feel free to talk to them. They've been equipped with tools and resources. That gives leadership then an opportunity in their meetings, like I was talking about, doing the one good, the one bad, or talking about this. Hey, we talked about this. If you feel like you may be struggling, you don't have to tell me that, but you know, come to me. Let's see if we can find some ways to problem solve this. Here are some resources that I know. So I think that that would be a really good start.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I'm taking notes while you were talking. And then another question we had was when you talked about meditation and that 27 minutes a day having a huge impact, does it need to be in a row, or could it be like exercise where we can break it up into meditation snacks?
Yeah, I love that. Meditation snacks is perfect. So yes, you do not have to commit to 27 minutes in one setting. That could be morning, afternoon, evening, however that works.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful news. All right. Does anybody else have any last questions or comments? You can throw them in the chat or you can unmute yourselves. We have a smaller group. All right. Well, we will have Catherine back 2 more times. So we're really excited for you to join us and invite some of your coworkers and leadership to these as well. We'll also have a recording for those who want to view it again or to send out to some of your colleagues. Thank you so much, Catherine. I hope you have a lovely week.
You too. Thank you so much, everyone.
We'll see you soon.
Okay, bye.